So I've mentioned a few different times on various videos and podcasts that I have some issues with the trad movement. The hashtag trad, things that you see generally on Twitter and other social media platforms as well. And I've had some people ask me about that and to get into some more specifics about exactly what the issue is that I have with that particular movement. So this is hopefully not going to be too long. I don't want to give a really detailed explanation here. I don't want to go too in depth, but I'm hoping to hit some of the kind of major points of criticism that I have of that movement. Now, let me just start off by saying that the reason people, I think, ask me about this is because I'm very traditional in many ways. Obviously my dress is very traditional. I have plenty of criticisms of modern culture. I have a lot of criticisms of modern ideologies, particularly pop culture. I could go on forever criticizing what's wrong with popular culture and media and the way that we view men and women today in our world. And in so many ways, I am what one would call traditional. I love opera and classical music, and I'm a proponent of classical education, and my scholarly work is largely in trying to recover classical metaphysics and classical theology, ideas from the ancient world, going back to the ancient Greeks through the medieval period into the Reformation. So my rooting is very classical, but at the same time, I don't think that trad is quite identified with, or should be identified with, maybe a classical approach, because I see some issues there. So what I'm going to talk about here is what I see as some major problems with the trad movement. So I think the first issue is this, and I see this with various movements, is that when you see something that is wrong with culture today, or you see ideologies that are problematic, we tend to want to jump back to some kind of idealistic age. And what happens is we idolize some particular age of history and say, well, things were great back then. And this can happen whenever. I mean, people do this with the Middle Ages. People do it with kind of the Roman era. I mean, you see this even in the Renaissance. Everybody's going back to Greece and to Rome as if that's kind of the height of all culture and we need to go back there. And then you see this with, for example, the Anglo-Catholic movement, people looking at the Middle Ages or someone like Thomas Aquinas and saying, well, that era, that's kind of the height of arts and theology, and we need to just go back to that era. And people today tend to do the same thing, and I see people doing this with different eras. You can do it with the 1950s and say, hey, the way that gender roles worked out in the 1950s, that's good, that's perfect, we need to just do that. And this is just, it's naive culturally and historically. When you look back at any era, you're going to see a lot of issues. And I think what we tend to do is idealize an era because they don't have the problems we have. But in reality, if you lived in that era, you would see that they have just as many problems. They're just different problems. So I don't think that the solution is to, cultural issues today is to say, well, here's some perfect era and we need to just recapture this. We need to face the reality of where we are today. And what we can do is recapture things from, the classical world or things from our history and our past, whatever it may be, and apply it to a modern context in a modern time without just jumping into let's kind of revert back to that age and pretend that we're living somewhere where we're not. And the second problem that I see, and this maybe depends on the particular individual or the particular couples or families that are talking about this, is that the way that the kind of male-female structure within a marriage is worked out is just really not traditional in any real sense. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's kind of an ideal that I see in, some, especially kind of, young trad couples. They want to live this traditional life where the woman is at home and takes care of the kids, and they have 20 kids or whatever, and the man goes out of the home and works. And so they move to some rural area somewhere, and they have a cabin in the woods, and this is just the ideal, picturesque life for everybody. Well, there can be several problems with that. One of them and really this is the major problem, is that in a traditional society, there's no such thing as an isolated mother living at home with a ton of kids having to take care of all those kids by herself. This is a huge problem that I saw this with, the homeschooling movement, with certain communities within the homeschool movement who expect that the mother will homeschool the kids, and there are so many kids, and that this is to be done only by the mother without any outside help. This it is not how traditional family structures worked. I mean, historically, and this is what I think needs to be recaptured, is the context of community. Now, think about this. In the first century, think about the example of Jesus when he's 12 years old, and he goes to the temple, and Mary's looking for him. She actually hasn't seen him for a couple days and thinks, oh, he's just with other family members, and doesn't really get too worried. And then all of a sudden she realizes she can't find him. The point of bringing this up is to say that in traditional cultures, the mother is not raising kids by herself at home alone all day. There is a community. And so, of course, the mother and father are the primary caretakers of their own children, but it's not done in isolation. And what we can't do is recapture this idea of a woman just being stuck at home without this broader context of community. And this is what creates loneliness and depression and just puts so much strain on a woman who is doing this. Now, my point is not to criticize if, a woman wants to do this and they decide to move out into the woods and they're good with that and want to do that. Okay, go for it. But that's not what traditionally families did. And the other aspect of that is that the notion that the man is just outside of the home working all day and then only comes home, later, at night and has his dinner ready for him, and then, maybe spends a little bit of time with the kids and then goes to bed. This is not traditional either. I mean, if you look at a lot of, classical cultures, or still cultures that exist around the world today that aren't affected by some of the same things that we are in the current Western context, men are also largely working from home, or they're, men go out hunting and doing things and take their boys with them. It's not like the men are these just absent, going out to work all day and then come home people. This is not the traditional structure. So my critique is that oftentimes what becomes labeled as traditional in a context of a marriage and the role of a husband and wife is that it often echoes or mirrors something that is really modern. It's something that is a product of modernity rather than anything that is actually traditional in any meaningful sense. And the third thing that I have a major problem with in the trad movement, and specifically the way that I just see people behaving online, is that there is simply no respect at all in the way that they deal with people. And this is about as far from traditional as one can possibly get. If there is any issue in our modern Western American culture, it is that we don't respect people. We don't have manners. We don't treat each other well. We think that we can just blast someone online and insult them. We think that we can take someone who is an authority figure, say, in their field, and throw out as many horrible insults as we desire. And a lot of trad men feel like they can get on Twitter and just throw and hurl insults at women and calling them ugly and calling them all sorts of horrid things. None of that is traditional. I mean, that is buying into what is the most problematic aspects of our contemporary culture. If you want to be traditional in any meaningful sense of what it means to be a man in traditional culture, have manners, have respect. That really is the central thing that you should care about above all other things. So you don't have any right to call yourself traditional in any sense whatsoever, or recapturing masculinity if you spend all day yelling at women on Twitter. And right now, I am reading through Jane Austen's novels. I'm in the last one that I have to read. And it's just something that, you observe when you look at, especially the, I guess she's technically pre-Victorian, but 19th century into the, Victorian era, later in the 19th century. If you look at the way that men, talked about and to women, there was clearly, like, respect was the thing that mattered above absolutely anything else. You couldn't refer to somebody by their first name. You couldn't say certain things or others that may be like a social faux pas or may offend somebody. And if somebody does something offensive, there need to be all of these apologies. And people from that era, which often is identified with the more traditional era, would be absolutely horrified by the ways that I see people who call themselves trad speaking about women and treating women, or anybody in reality, or anybody. So what I think needs to be recaptured, and I've said this many times, but what I would love to see recaptured is the traditional idea of being a gentleman, because I think that is key. If you want to be a man, you're not a man when you go online and yell at people. You are a man when you learn how to take care of yourself. You get out of your pajamas and put on a suit. You take care of your stuff. You treat people with respect, especially women, and you stop blaming everybody else for your problems. Because this is what I see with a lot of these, kind of trad men, is that, they can't get a girlfriend, or they can't get married, or they can't get what they want, and you just blame feminism, or you blame whatever. And you tend to just lash out and blame everybody else for your problems instead of actually, like, taking responsibility for yourself and trying to better yourself and your community and live in a way that is honorable and respectful. And if whatever problems there are with feminism, I'm not a feminist, but it's not going to be beneficial in response to that to just yell about how you hate women or you hate feminism. You need to make a change by being a decent, respectable human being and modeling what it really means to be a man, what it really means to be a gentleman, one who can show honor and respect and value and use manners and etiquette and these kinds of things, which have been completely lost in our world today. The fourth problem I see with the trad movement is that there is this kind of obsessive love of marriage. Now, let me just say here first, I love marriage. I'm married. I got married young. I think getting married young is a wonderful thing. I think having kids young is a wonderful thing. And it's the thing that I'm, like, most grateful for in my life is my marriage, other than, what God has done for me in Christ. But there can be a wrong focus on marriage. And I think what happens is our culture has shifted so far away from marriage being honorable and family mattering, and we've moved into such an age of you take care of you and yourself first. You live for yourself, and you care about your career above all other things. These things are rightly criticized by those within the trad movement. But the problem is that a lot of the trad people that I see don't seem to think there's really any place for singleness at all in a culture or community. And that's not traditional. Those aren't traditional Christian values by any means. It has always been the case that the church has seen a place for those who are single. This is why we have monastic callings. We have monks and nuns and vows of celibacy. These things are the case in the New Testament. We see this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul deals with this, and there has always been a place within the history of Western culture, especially Christian culture, for those who are single. And so what the trad movement has done is this kind of overreaction. So they've said, like, okay, our culture kind of devalues marriage and devalues the family, and all that needs to be corrected. And so instead of actually going back to what I would call a really Christian, like, traditional approach to this, which values family very much, and children and marriage, all of these things, but also doing so with recognizing singleness and trying to establish community, and community for single people. Because what you have now, the problem is that single people, because we're also isolated, single people are so isolated, there's no community whatsoever. And that's a reality that we have to wrestle with, and we should have like answers for those people. And instead of just saying, hey, you should get married, to people that probably maybe really want to get married and just can't, maybe we should actually show them honor and respect in the calling that God has given them at this point in life, and not just assume that there's something wrong with them because they didn't get married right away like you may have. And the fifth problem that I see in the trad movement is that a lot of the ways that the role of the man is described is very kind of authoritarian, or the man is, does nothing of housework at home. And it's the idea that like the man does nothing at home at all. The man just kind of even gives orders to his wife, or like even punishes his wife. And you see just kind of crazy stuff out there on the extreme fringes of things. And that is not a traditional Christian approach to how marriage works. If you think that a man can like punish his wife or harm his wife in any way and use authority as a way to justify it, I would urge you to go back to the writings of John Chrysostom and read his sermons. Read his sermons where he deals with these marriage texts, and he rails against anyone who would be harmful or abusive to their wives in any sense whatsoever. And that's just an exposition of the New Testament text. I think that's clear, Old and New Testament, that's the case scripturally. So any way that you define the roles of men and women in marriage, where a man can in any sense be abusive to a woman, is completely like, that shouldn't even be an option. If you want to be like a respectful man in a traditional sense, the number one role of a man in relation to a woman should be that he should be her protector. If you really do believe there's a difference between men and women, and men are to be the heads, that means your number one role is to protect women. And that means that men should be the first ones speaking against other men who are abusing women in any sense whatsoever. If that's really your role, if there really is a distinction between man and woman, which I believe there is. And what we've done is taken that, what a lot of the trad movement has done, is taken that role of protector, right, in head, in a way that is actually for the good of the other and self-sacrificial, which is modeled on Christ's love for the church, which is the imagery that Paul uses in Ephesians 5. And you've taken that in an authoritarian sense. The other thing, as I mentioned, home, there's a great quote from, Martin Luther, where he speaks about those who say, oh, if a man like takes care of his baby or changes diapers, he's being effeminate. And Luther is like very blunt against this. And he's like, no, get off your butt and do it. Help your wife. That is the case. That's the way you should be too. If you are a man and you are married, it doesn't mean that you don't have distinctions in your household. But if your wife needs help, you get off your butt and help her. That's what a man does. That's what a gentleman does. That is a way to show love and honor and respect, which you should care about above all other things in your relationships with really anybody. So I have plenty of other criticisms of the trad movement, but these are just some of the things that are on my mind. If you are interested in the idea of being a gentleman, which is something that I prize, something that I strive for. That doesn't mean that I always do it perfectly, but it really is something that I see as good and honorable. I would recommend a book series called the Gentle Manners series by John Bridges, and he has a series of books that deal with things like manners and speech and etiquette and how a man should dress. And I found them really helpful, kind of invaluable resources in terms of thinking through social interactions and how is it that you are traditional in a real sense, like in a way that you can recapture what is respect for other people and that you can act in a way that is honorable and will garner respect for yourself. And it's not by yelling at people on the internet. So I hope you found this helpful. I know I've tried to make this pretty short. There's so much I could say about this issue. If you have any comments or questions on this, or you want me to delve into this further, I can, if you have any desire for me to do that, but maybe not. Anyway, this was just a response to this movement because some people have asked me to give some reasoning there. So thank you so much, and please do like and comment and subscribe and all of that, and we'll see you in the next one. God bless.